Our Education Infrastructure Showcase, Building a Smarter Greater Western Sydney. Our esteemed panellists are Professor Barney Glover AO, Vice-Chancellor and President of Western Sydney University, Lillian Gordon, Director, Kimberwalli, Aboriginal Affairs New South Wales, Erik, Maranik, Executive Director, School Infrastructure New South Wales, Dr Michael Spence AC, Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Sydney, and our moderator is David Tao. David is the lead Cities Consulting Group, WSP. Please make them welcome. Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome back after lunch. There's an important university business going on in the front row. Firstly, I'd just like to congratulate Chris and Adam and Faith and everyone else at the Western Sydney Leadership Dialogue. It's such an important policy forum to keep the debate going and keep the profile of Western Sydney issues. So thank you everyone for supporting it so strongly. We've heard a lot today about the history of infrastructure development in Sydney, the way that a lot of infrastructure has been designed to convey people mainly from the west to the east, be they workers, be they students, be those looking for culture or recreational opportunities. It's great to have a panel today and a topic which is really focusing on investing in infrastructure in the west to build the true, be it Western Parkland City or the Central City, and try and overcome some of those planning issues that have bedevilled Sydney for so long. I think everyone here would agree with the mantra, education is destiny, and nowhere is that more important in Sydney than in Western Sydney. In 2016, 20% of the population of Western Sydney have a bachelor or higher degree. That's a great improvement from 2001 when about 10% had those degrees, but still well below the 28% of the population of Greater Sydney that has a bachelor or higher degree. A lot of the improvement that's come over the last 15 or so years, no doubt, has come from initiatives such as those at Western Sydney University to build out their city centre campuses, as well as for many other initiatives across the higher education, vocational and secondary education sectors. But clearly there's much to be done to improve parity in opportunity and in education generally, and in developing the skills that will enable residents of Western Sydney to fill those jobs that will be created in Western Sydney, the jobs of the future. We've got four great leaders from the New South Wales education sector here today. And so I'll just start by asking a question of each of them to enable them to showcase some of their current initiatives. We'd also really invite questions from the floor. So I can't see it very well up here, but please, there's people roaming with microphones if you have a question. And then we might have some other questions, seeing how it goes. So firstly, to Barney, obviously you've got a great initiative being your Western growth strategy. Could you tell us a bit more about that, what it's trying to achieve and how it might transform some of the areas WSU is investing in?
Thanks, David. It's great to be here, and relevant to your question, particularly great to be here in Bankstown because, of course, we're planning and in advanced stages of planning our Bankstown City campus, which will open in a couple of years very close to here, beside the library and the car park. So it'll be a 30,000 square metre campus, part of our Western Growth Initiative, part of both the process of developing our urban cities, our urban regeneration of the cities of Western Sydney, which is so critical, but importantly putting educational infrastructure where it's needed. In this case, right here in the heart of Bankstown. You quoted a figure a moment ago in terms of educational attainment, higher degree attainment in Western Sydney, and it lagging behind on the 2016 figures. Well, in some parts of the city it lags even further than that in Western Sydney. So from that perspective here in Canterbury, Bankstown, and Bankstown in particular, our strategy is quite large. That is, we have an obligation to bring educational opportunity here to Western Sydney. It's in the Act of Parliament that defines our university, and it's our mission as an institution, so it's clearly articulated, that relationship with region. And Western Growth is about reshaping our campus network to meet the needs of students in the 21st century in a growth region like Western Sydney. And particularly since the announcement of Badgerys Creek, the Nancy Bird Walton Western Sydney International Airport, We've had, over that last 5 years, an opportunity to ensure, that's a picture of Bankstown campus, the architectural design for Bankstown. We've had an opportunity to think very carefully about how we position our campus network, how we build on our existing campuses, Rydalmere, the historic Rydalmere campus, our Campbelltown campus focused on medicine and health, what we're doing in our cluster of campuses in Penrith, of course Hawkesbury, the very important heritage complex at Hawkesbury with a history in agriculture, very close history with the University of Sydney as well. But how do we also position our vertical campuses in the CBDs, like in Parramatta with 1 PSQ, the Peter Shergold building, here in Bankstown, Narranura, which you saw a moment ago on the screen, which of course is our new campus we opened a year ago in the heart of Liverpool. And that's already, we're beginning to see the change that that's making in Liverpool as we plan the next major development for the university there in conjunction with the hospital development more broadly. So Western Growth is about reshaping our campus network. It's about ensuring that our facilities are where they need to be in the 21st century, close to transport, close to urban centres, close to where students can get access to our facilities, where we can address educational disadvantage, but also, as you put it a moment ago, David, ensure that the graduates from the university are there for jobs in Western Sydney and to boost the economies of our region. So it's an exciting program for us. It's a decadal program, so we've had some, I think, early successes with Parramatta, Liverpool, the planning here for Bankstown. You saw a moment ago our plans for Westmead, and I'm sure Michael will say more about Westmead because of the University of Sydney's great plans there. Michael and I are working very closely on the central city, what we can do between the University of Sydney and Western Sydney University, between Westmead, Parramatta and Sydney Olympic Park, in the Greater Parramatta to Olympic Park precinct. Another great opportunity for large education and health infrastructure to change the shape of the central city, what the airport will do with the Aerotropolis and our involvement there, how we can build and rebuild the cities of this region. I think it's such an exciting time, and we're very proud of Western Growth as an initiative, and we look forward to great results from it over the next few years.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Barney. And as an alumni of Campbelltown Public School, it's great to see such a fantastic vision for Western Sydney through WSU. And just to turn to Michael with the Sydney University's initiatives, Western Sydney Uni has a very clear vision for its role in Western Sydney. Obviously, you see there's a new entrant, and we've all heard so much about, well, not a new entrant because we've already had a long history with Westmead and so forth, but we've all heard so much about the Parramatta North campus. Could you tell us a bit how that negotiation is going, the plans for the rollout of the campus, and how that will contribute to the development of Western Sydney?
Yes, so the one thing I can't talk about is how the negotiations are rolling out, because we have a protocol in relation to the negotiations with the government, and we're very scrupulous about that. But I do want to say something about the vision. As you mentioned, we've been at Westmead for a very long time. The hospital was built by a committee chaired by the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Sydney, to a design by a professor at the University of Sydney, and all the rest of it. And have been slowly expanding our work there from what you might call the health disciplines, stricto sensu, medicine, dentistry, nursing, pharmacy, and so on, to bringing the range of disciplines that there are at the university, business, computer studies, engineering, science, to health issues on the health precinct. And then the next logical development there was to say, well, what about building what will eventually be a full-scale second campus for the university in the central city. We wanted to make sure that this was a campus that would not just serve the needs of Western Sydney, but actually that would draw people not only from around the city, but around the world, that it would be something that was genuinely innovative. And we've put a lot of investment over the last 10 years into getting into disciplinary research and teaching right, making sure that we're asking the questions not just that academics are asking one another, but the questions that our community are asking, and that we're bringing the disciplines together to focus on those questions. So we thought, what would it look like to have a campus that was organised not around disciplinary lines, but actually around multidisciplinary lines, and offered postgraduate teaching in particular, but also really high quality research to attract people from around the world and to build links with industries in those areas. And that was a vision that just took off in the university, and it was a natural complement to the work that we are doing at Westmead already. And so we're planning for a campus that will initially probably, almost certainly, have as its opening themes advanced manufacturing, where we have a particular expertise, and we are working with partners such as GE Global to pursue our research in that area. Advanced manufacturing, bringing our work too in artificial intelligence and the social sciences of artificial intelligence together, and also our work in radical inequality. The thing around those three themes is that not only do we think they're very important for the future of this city and beyond, but they also have very close opportunities for connections with both community organisations and with industries, and are obviously areas of particular expertise for the university, but they build on our work in health in a natural kind of way. So we are, this is in no sense the University of Sydney's other campus or the University of Sydney's Western Sydney campus. This is going to be a premier location for us that we think will be doing work that will draw people to the region from around the world. The other question that we often get asked is about how these plans at Westmead Parramatta relate to our extensive land holdings in the Parkland city, at Bringelly, obviously at Camden, where we've been working in agriculture and vet science for a long time, but also in the significant land holdings that we have around the entrance to the new city. And for us, that's a bit at the moment of a wait and see. The logical thing for us to do in the Parkland city is work that builds on the industry connections that there are going to be there in the applied industrial research space. That's the sort of thing that we are talking about at the moment. But we want to make sure that we get the vision for Westmead Parramatta really developed and implemented as we begin the conversations about what we're doing around the Erythropolis. And I think that's the right staging for us as an institution, but also the right staging arguably for the conversation in planning for the city more generally. And we share a concern with Western Sydney University that in the rush to the Parkland city, the enormous potential that is still to be realised in the central city is not forgotten. And so for us it's very much getting the Westmead Parramatta project truly secured as we then begin to implement our vision for the Parkland city.
Okay, thanks, Morgan. I'm sure that in future years we'll hear more about the Multiversity in the Parkland city and how that is a piece of the jigsaw puzzle between your institutions, and I'm sure that'll be a topic for future years.
And I think that's right. You know, the city is incredibly lucky in having such depth in higher education, teaching and research. And it's only really as the universities, as they are increasingly doing, are thinking about serving the city in a much more coordinated way than they traditionally have, that we're going to be able to realise the potential that offers.
Yeah, okay. We might come back to that, but I might just move to Lillian Gordon. We're also excited by the Kimberwalli project, the opportunity in the Darug language for many stars to shine, and we talk about the lack of opportunity for Indigenous people throughout Australia, but Western Sydney obviously is a massive population. Could you tell us a bit about how this fits into the broader sort of ochre policy of Aboriginal affairs and the sort of outcomes you are expecting from the Kimberwalli project?
Sure, absolutely. But firstly, in terms of our certainly protocols, I would like to acknowledge country and acknowledge the traditional custodians and the people of the Darug Nation in this area, and pay respects to our elders past and present, and also to other Aboriginal people in the room. I do want to take the opportunity to give people an understanding of what an acknowledgement is. I want you to take some time to have a think about a place for you in the country, in Australia, that's really important to you. Just have a think about that place for a moment. It might be a place you've been going for years with your family. It might be a tree in your backyard, I don't suggest it's a local down the road, although that can be significant at times. But a place, and have a think about what happens when you're at that place. You know, it could be the beach. I have to say I'm a muddy water person myself because there's these giant things in the ocean that can eat you whole. So have a think about that place. When you're thinking about that place, think about what are you hearing when you're at that place? What are you seeing when you're at that place? What can you smell? Good smells, I hope. What do you feel? But really importantly, who do you remember when you're at that place? Who are the people that you connect to when you're at that place? What does that mean to you when you keep visiting that place? And silence is okay. So that's why we do acknowledgement to country. That place gives you something. You don't go there necessarily and say, I am going to get peace and tranquility out of this joint today, but it brings something to you. But that tree, that rock, that sand, that earth, it holds those memories for you, and it helps that breathe when you come to that place. So when we acknowledge country, it's really important to understand that it's not just a flippant concept. It's real, and it's about acknowledging the very infrastructure that is the basic infrastructure of this country, and that is Mother Earth itself. So, you know, I just wanted to give you some idea of what that was meaning in terms of an acknowledgement. A welcome is quite different. It's about someone who is from that country. I'm from a little town in a different west, out near Backaburg, Brewarrina. So for me, I can only do an acknowledgement. A welcome is done by somebody who's from that country or given that right. But I want you to have a think about that the next time that you're doing that, because it's important for everything that we're trying to do, particularly in terms of Kimberwalli. So just giving you some background about that. So Kimberwalli came about as part of a Premier's priority in 2015. The idea was to build an Aboriginal Centre of Excellence in Western Sydney. Why Western Sydney? It is one of the fastest growing Aboriginal populations in New South Wales. So it has around about 42,000 people living in that area in terms of Aboriginal population, and it is continuing to grow. As part of that though, the opportunity that's there is that 50% of those people are aged under 24. So it comes with a great opportunity in terms of some of the things that we need to change. When we showed the latte line, I think that Chris showed before, lots of that is about our communities as well. So there's lots for us to actually develop and improve on. But we know that story, so it's not something that I would necessarily want to keep reiterating. It's about how do we change some of that language, how do we change some of the dialogue to start talking about what's positive and what's real and what's realistic for our young people to achieve. So in that, Kimberwalli then was announced by Minister Mitchell as the new name for the Aboriginal Centre for Excellence. It's Kimberwalli meaning many stars in Darug language. It's really important that Kimberwalli is embedded in culture and identity as its platform and its main foundation, so that we bring that all the way through. It is out at a building at Wayland, the old Wayland High School near Mount Druitt, and that building came about as a result of lots of community consultation. We have a young project advisory committee who I can proudly say are over here amongst us right now, so I clearly would like to acknowledge them. Brooke, we've got Renee, we've got Tilly, we've got Maddie, Makisha's not here, and Blake's not here, David and Jake's not here. All these young people work. They are doing a number of different university degrees. They're involved in just about anything that moves, but they give their time to this space so that we have that voice that shines through. So one of the aspects of OCA meaning Opportunity, Choice, Healing, Responsibility and Empowerment, is actually the New South Wales Government Plan for Aboriginal Affairs. So it's how do we connect the Aboriginal voice from communities with government, and how do we transform that relationship? The history has been that a lot has been done to Aboriginal communities. This is about how do we hear that voice and how do we bring that into that place. So that was why we needed the young group to be able to do that. And like I mentioned, the young people in Western Sydney have to be that voice and bringing that forward and doing those things. Pardon me. And they are incredible about what they do, and that community absolutely raises them up in terms of that approach. In terms of what it's doing as far as the OCA outcomes is very much about opportunity and choice. So we want to have a place that's probably embedded a lot in technology. It needs to be a place where Aboriginal people are at the forefront of something. A lot of what happens is we have a lot of this infrastructure that's coming in, and then there's a thought about, okay, but what about the Aboriginal population? This is about being at the very front of that and making sure we are part of that. Technology isn't bound by infrastructure, so it's a great place to start. We have a partnership with Microsoft and LinkedIn in doing that, and we also have a partnership with the Western Sydney Leadership Dialogue, which has been really awesome in that approach as well. So the aim for this centre really is around young people shaping their own destiny. So it's about them, it's about their own learning, their own pathway as such, and it's about providing those opportunities. So it's helping understand that, yes, certainly, in terms of all the infrastructure coming in, all of the building construction, yes, you can be a construction worker, but you can also be an engineer, you can be an architect, you can be all of those things, and it's being able to shine a light on all of those for young people to pursue whatever it is that they need to pursue. I think one of the things that was mentioned earlier from Greg Whitby, which I think was amazing, it's frightening in some form for those who are in the education system, having been a teacher myself, that we do need to transform the education system to be able to meet those learning aspirations for our young people in that. So that's the hope for Kimberwalli into the future. It's certainly about being able to leverage off what's happening in schools. It's not a replacement for anything, and nor should it be. It's about something that's an added value to everything else. It's about connecting with universities. It's about connecting with health precincts. It's about connecting with everything that's possible. I mean, I'm sitting up here amongst professors and doctors, but I'm the keeper of the dreadlocks. You'll remember me that way. In terms of that.
At least you've got hair.
And it's all mine even. It's all mine in terms of that. So, it's really, really exciting. And I guess that, there's some priorities out now about increasing the attainment into Year 12 for Aboriginal young people. Is that the right measurement? Not really sure. But the thing for me that it says it's maintaining culture and identity is the real key to all of that. If we know who we are and how strong we are and how strongly we're connected to that, everything else is a little bit easier. But the other part of that is if we're widely accepted by our communities by which we're in more broadly is the other key to that. So, Aboriginal people are one of the most highly trained people in the country. The outcomes as far as jobs, as far as higher education is where we're missing that mark. So it's really important for us in that. Hope that helped.
No, thanks, Lillian. I think we all appreciate the passion and hope it energises us to keep doing great things. And the insights to welcome to country, really appreciate it as well. Thank you. The other amazing secondary education project in Western Sydney is Arthur Phillip High. Obviously, it's been a little controversial, and we're not sure whether it'll be replicated or not. But Erik, can you talk us through a little bit about the types of challenges and lessons that have been learned from that project, and how some of those may inform the development of secondary education in the greenfield areas of the Western Parkland City as new schools are rolled out?
Be a pleasure, and welcome everybody, and thank you for coming. I'm conscious that it's after the 2 o'clock session. I don't have any jokes except I can relate to the hair joke quite well.
Very pointed from my
Yeah, it was.
this end of the tongue.
There's two, I guess I'd ask people to think about two things. One is context and the other is scale. So in terms of context, lessons learnt is that the school portfolio is an amazingly large portfolio. And when you look at other educational institutions, whether that's non-government, universities, you add it all up and some really amazing statistics start to come out. We probably have the largest roof area, for example, of any portfolio in the world if you add it all together. We're roughly 15 times bigger than Westfields if you add up our GFA. It's significant. And so in terms of context, I think if there was a lesson learnt really at the highest level, it's to start this narrative around placemaking versus how to get to place. And I think that if we looked deeper into the placemaking advantages that come with such a significant investment like Arthur Phillip, the connections would have been made earlier. And I think the involvement of the people that we're really here to cater to, as in the children, might have been explored a little bit further. So context to me is very, very important when you look at it within the cluster of the other schools around the school and how it relates to that. One of the things as infrastructure people we need to be really, really careful about is the bright, shiny new gets the attraction, it gets the attention, it gets the media attention. But you don't want to set up a gravity model where all of a sudden all the attention goes to that and you actually start to devalue potentially some of those existing asset base. So you've got to look at it in the context of how that educational pathway links for the individual as a child, how that works through the system and whether or not we know about them very early through the healthcare system. So there's a role there for primary healthcare, and its link with education and education infrastructure, and then follow that journey, whether it leads to vocational education or university education, and how do we respond as infrastructure people to not just enable those links, but actually encourage them in a meaningful way. So I think context is my first thing. The second thing is scale. In terms of scale, just imagine a couple walking down the beach with a little child between their arms. They think it's a wonderful space, it's a lovely breeze, it's nice and warm, and they keep getting tugged on the arms. It's not until they look down that that same child is experiencing sand being blown in their face. They're not having a really cool time of it. All they want to do is go and play in the water. But as adults, we get the impression that things are all fine and dandy and we're having a great time. But scale and children and infrastructure is a conversation, particularly around placemaking, we have to do more and more of. Architects, God love them, I'm an engineer, love these big open spaces. Got to have columns somewhere, guys, just to hold stuff up. But if you're a smaller human, if you're a child, those spaces actually can be huge voids where there's no love, there's no connection to place. So how as infrastructure providers do we look through the eye of the child and make sure that that infrastructure actually responds to their educational needs, the educational pathways that it sets up? So as it comes to Arthur Phillip as a structure, it's absolutely fascinating, and I think that when you get the opportunity to walk through, some of my comments about context and scale will start to make some sense. It has some amazing spaces in it, which from an educational perspective will drive amazing educational outcomes, but fundamentally our role is to make sure that we enhance that, keep the rain and the wind off people as they learn, and let the teachers do what teachers do best, which is add to the education of the child. So they're my two themes, context and scale, and we've got a lot of lessons learned in that space.
I think there's a lot to be taken from your point about education institutions' role in placemaking rather than just being destinations, and we're seeing the importance of that being conveyed right through our political establishment with the Minister for Public Places now and so forth. I'd just maybe hold that theme from you and maybe ask one of the Vice-Chancellors to comment on the role of your new institutions in placemaking and how they're contributing to the development of much better places in Western Sydney.
Well, perhaps if I start, Michael might like to add. I wanted to pick up actually Erik's point relevant to this. I agree. Arthur Phillip is going to be an extraordinary school, and we look at it from the windows of the Peter Shergold building and see the opportunity here, I think, for the precincts. If you talk about placemaking, I think in the context of Western Sydney, that's often about our city centres and our precincts that are emerging. We're investing, the state government's investing a huge amount in health infrastructure right across Western Sydney. All the major hospitals are undergoing billion-dollar expansions. There's opportunities to co-locate educational institutions, not just universities, but TAFE, high schools, primary schools, to create really lively, engaged spaces. And so placemaking is important to all of us, and I think precincts are part of that. We're looking at our Werrington campuses near Penrith as an opportunity to create a living laboratory, a new opportunity to think about placemaking at the edge of the airport, close to Penrith, on the rail link into Parramatta, but a new concept of sustainability and environmental high amenity in the context of a location like that. So I think universities play a crucial role, educational institutions play a crucial role, health infrastructure plays a crucial role in placemaking.
Would you like to comment, Michael?
I just think you've got to pay attention to every detail. A reasonable question for the Arthur Phillip High School is why we're naming a school for a colonising naval officer at the beginning of the 21st century, but we'll leave that to one side. Except that it's a really important, those things send really important signals. It's really important that you think about every detail in the creation of a place in the way that you're obviously doing. For us at Westmead, that's really been about making sure that what we do not create is the campus of a university, but an integrated space in which there's commercial activity, in which there's potentially secondary school education as well as tertiary education, in which there's residential accommodation not only for people associated with the university but also potentially for key workers and the rest of it, so that you have a place that is lively around the clock and also where there is a porosity between the activity of the university and the activities of the communities that in one way or another we're trying to serve. And so I think if for us there's been a theme in placemaking, it is precisely this theme about the porosity of the borders of the university as we physically express the way in which we want to be more engaged with not only communities in Western Sydney but also beyond.
Just maybe perhaps to close out the placemaking theme, I know you're looking at me, Lillian, and I'm looking at you as well. So would you like to comment on the importance of indigenous design as well?
Yeah, and from an Aboriginal perspective, it certainly is absolutely critical in terms of infrastructure and how we do that. So for Kimberwalli, we had an Aboriginal architect, and in terms of his work, it was how did he connect the place to country, to be able to see the mountains, to be able to understand the colours of the country and make sure that was embedded into the building. A big part of the space is about healing and connection, so it was really important for us to have things like a fire pit. It might sound like that's fairly basic, but that's Aboriginal people come together around fire, around food, around all those fun things that make us connect as people and have those conversations. So it was really, really important that we had that. We had an Aboriginal building company, which then was able to articulate that design, and a number of Aboriginal contractors. So not only was it around Aboriginal procurement, but it was certainly about the place being very much a place of healing, of connection, and for Aboriginal people to feel safe in that place, which sounds a bit like it shouldn't have to happen, but it absolutely needs to, and it needs to be a place that young people can feel absolutely connected. So,
and what's kind of cool about that is it's the processes of the conversation involved in placemaking that are actually also healthy for the institution. So I know in the creation and application of our Ringaramura Indigenous design principles for our spaces across the university's work, we think those principles are per se important, but the conversation at the university about the fact that those principles were important and the process of coming to them was a maturing process for us as an institution as well.
Okay. Look at that, we're all learning.
Okay, all right, kumbaya. So we've got some time for some questions from the audience. I've received one by text. Slightly left field, but we'll pose that this is to the two Vice-Chancellors. Do you both agree that the existing multiversity at the Aerotropolis needs a TAFE facility to make it truly representative of tertiary education? Any views on that?
Well, again, because Western Sydney University is part of at least one consortium that is very interested in the multiversity concept with University of New South Wales, Newcastle and Wollongong, I think it's vital that TAFE is involved in the Aerotropolis as a concept. In fact, I'd suggest that we shouldn't be really talking about a multiversity at the Aerotropolis, apart from the fact that it's a shocking phrase. But in the context of saying, can we actually work out a different way of contextualising and delivering post-secondary education? And from that point, let's have schools out there as well. And Michael's point and Lillian's a very passionate point about placemaking. I think we should be looking at a new way of delivering skills for the future. It's a very disrupted world out there that young people will be entering. So let's think about this a little bit differently, the way sectors work together and engage. And from that perspective, if TAFE, I think there's a mega TAFE concept that the state government will support. Well, I don't think it should stand alone. It should be integrated into an educational presence.
So there's a general problem here, which is the Australian system is still so much built upon an essentially 19th century vision, highly class-based, in which the assumption was that there was a design engineer and it was always a he, went to university, and then there was a mechanic. And he, and again it was usually a he, went into technical education. We know that the kinds of skills that are going to be required in the Aerotropolis, operate along a much broader spectrum than that. And institutions like the Singapore, systems like the Singaporean system, like the German system, they've tackled they've tackled the question of how you deliver that range of skills. From the skill of the mechanic to the skill of the highly skilled technical worker who may not need the full needs, the full suite of skills that are offered by a design engineering course, but nevertheless may need more than those that were traditionally offered in mechanics education, and have thought about those things sort of holistically. The fact that we haven't in Australia presents real problems. It's why, for example, the foreign defence contractors who are coming here to build the submarines say that they can't get the labour force that they need in Australia, because there's not people at each stage of the sort of skills spectrum that are available there. It would be a real pity if at the Erythropolis all we did was whack a university and whack a TAFE without thinking about the range of skills that are going to be required for the for the high-tech activities that we hope are going to be there.
The shift that I think is coming is that there's been a real focus on the economic infrastructure. As we move to this social infrastructure flavour and the integration of services and human services for the benefit of the society, you're going to see a shift where organisations, certainly such as mine, don't need to be seen as a property developer. We need to be seen as part of the fabric of the social infrastructure that enables the community wellbeing. So there's a whole mind shift that needs to come with that. And if we're able to get that across the line, I think some of the comments that we've been talking about can be brought into that conversation. We can get those pairings and those pathways far more robust.
Yeah. And I think it just brings up the theme of the importance of collaboration to enable innovation, to enable efficiency and productivity that we've been hearing today. We've got some time for questions from the audience. Do we have anyone who wants to ask a question? There's a couple of microphones around. One over here. Yep.
Sorry, this is my second question today, but I felt I couldn't miss the opportunity of this. I'm a bit of a fan of Jane Jacobs, and it does worry me a little bit. The placemaking becomes a little bit formulaic and a little bit all driven around health and education. And while there's great synergies that can happen and attract, I'm just concerned that we think about some of the organic stuff that might happen, and sometimes the organic stuff that gets displaced when bigger institutions come in and values increase, and whether any thought has been given to that. Obviously in the Parkland city that's not such an issue where the Erythropolis is being located, but in other areas it is.
Jane Jacobs did talk about the importance of the density of places, the density of activity in places, so there was an element of quantity there as well. But to hand over to the panel, any responses there?
Well, I think it's an incredibly important point, and I totally agree with you. I think we have got to be very careful. At the moment, of course, there's a lot of focus around big infrastructure, because that's what Western Sydney is defined by at the moment, because of the airport, transport connectivity, hospitals and so on. So it does, in fact, preoccupy the thinking a little bit about how we leverage off that investment to the maximum benefit, long-term benefit of the state. But I agree with you. I think there's a cultural issue here we have to be very careful about what happens to our cities if we're not careful about that long-term planning. And it's not just about, co-locating things on one site and bulldozing things to create it. So there's a very important responsibility on our local government authorities right across Western Sydney to understand how to preserve and to develop and ensure that it flourishes a whole range of aspects of Western Sydney we don't want to lose. Now, as a university, we're developing an arts and culture decadal plan. We want to look at how we support, just as one example of this, arts and culture right across the region. I'm also president of the Board of Trustees of the Powerhouse Museum, so very conscious of the project there to create an extraordinary museum in Parramatta, and part of the connectivity of Parramatta of that development to other cultural facilities in Western Sydney. So it's a really important issue, and I'm glad you raised it, and I think it's one that I think our councils have to be very, very focused on, our planning authorities, our chief government architects, our local members, very much our Aboriginal communities too. Vitally important that, as Lillian said so passionately, we listen to our Aboriginal elders and communities about what placemaking really means and what's at risk if we don't get it right. So I agree.
It's the point I was trying to make in terms of not devaluing what's already there by being distracted by the bright, shiny new. Many of the schools in our portfolio are the hearts of the towns they're in, because they're in a sense, maybe the last government building standing. So as a consequence of that equity piece, we need to think about not as investment equity, but equity in terms of the educational opportunities provided to the children. And when you put that lens across it, I think the relevance and importance of your point even gets magnified.
I think it's particularly important in Western Sydney, if I may say, because it's not merely that big pieces of infrastructure are being planned. It's also that the communities of the central city and the Western City are diverse in many, many, many ways. So, for example, Westmead, where we're obviously involved in development at the moment, has the second highest concentration of PhD graduates living in the state. It's a highly educated, very, very highly educated postcode. And that's a part of the makeup of that local community, as is also obviously the work of the Land Council, with whom we are in close conversation. And yet often when people talk about the West or Western Sydney or the central city, they make sort of sweeping generalisations about the nature of the communities that make up those parts of the city. And I think in placemaking, it's very important that you don't lose those organic characteristics of the local community in the big broad brush planning.
Okay, I think we're winding up now, the time, so...
I just have one more thing, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Just because I think I've got the hair, so I thought I might take the opportunity. But I wanted to remind everybody about NAIDOC Week, which is the 7th to the 14th. It's the National Aboriginal Islander Day of celebration in many ways. So I encourage you to go out and connect with the communities that are out there and be part of that celebration, because it really is a great week. And this year's theme is Voice, Treaty, Truth. I won't go into that. I grew up all this politics and whatnot, but please, I encourage you to get out and celebrate with the First Nations of this country. Thank you.
Thanks for that.